Hello and welcome back to A Sound of Crying. We have 2 chapters left in the book. I'm just going to blow them out now because I have forgotten to read in the last little while. I've been traveling, coming back from Fort McMurray, all that jazz. So it's a little bit late right now, so hopefully I'm not keeping anybody awake. Our last chapter, just to refresh everybody, Polly was having a dream about Sara, except this time she was really, really sad, and so she went and talked to Mr. Mathers to tell him that she thinks that her room is haunted because she always hears crying and it's not coming from anywhere else. So she tries to tell her uncle and auntie she doesn't want to sleep in that room. She can't explain it, but she doesn't want to, and they think she's being silly. They give her some aspirin because she's being super sad and withdrawn, crying a lot. So they just, they don't really believe her because they think she's a storyteller. Okay, so here comes the last 2 chapters of A Sound of Crying. Let's do this. Okay, so chapter 11 is called The Middle of the Night. She was Sara again, and the time was the middle of the afternoon on the following day. She had been keeping herself too busy to brood, with the result that she had come to the end of her jobs early. Uncle Simon was in his study. He was back to normal today. The bare, tidy kitchen depressed her, and she knew her empty room would depress her even more. She decided to go outside. Thugden ran up as she closed the back door, and she greeted him affectionately. He seemed to realize that she would play with him today, and bounded round her, waving his tail and snapping his teeth in mock rage. She felt apologetic for having neglected him lately. Her intended walk in the woods became a run, with Thugden leaping tirelessly ahead. When he plunged into the middle of a patch of bluebells, she called to him, laughing and breathless. "Oh, Thugden, get out of them, you clumsy great dog! You're crushing them!" They were the first she had seen this year. Thugden trotted on her side, while she tenderly rescued the snapped stems and sniffed their wild smell. He reached up to sniff them too, and knocked them far from her hand with his eager nose. "Thugden!" She spoke several times. She spoke severely this time. Whoops. He rolled his eyes anxiously. "Hang your head," she continued. "Go on, and your tail." When he looked suitably dejected, she patted him. Later they came to the point where the stream ran through the wall. Something had been going on here. A pile of damp sods lay on the bank, as though they might have been recently used to dam the hole. She suddenly wondered if this had been how Uncle Simon got his Betty's shoes, and she looked downstream and saw the rest of his activity. She knew. "How pretty," she said slowly. "Thugden, imagine him building a pool." It was impossible. She gazed at the reflections until she had a childish desire to ruffle the mirror surface, and found a piece of stick. Thugden gave a short, eager bark and began to dance about. "Oh, Thugden, you fool! This isn't the lake." But he looked so disappointed that she threw it in for him all the same, leaping back to avoid the spray as he plunged after it. He caused such a commotion in the small pool that he lost the stick, and she was too busy watching his search to notice the figure slowly ascending the hill until a twig cracked not far away. "Thugden, come out," she said in a low, urgent voice. The dog didn't hear, but her uncle did. He jerked up his head and came hurrying towards them. "Come out!" cried Sara, and simultaneously. "Here, sir," bellowed her uncle. Thugden leaped out in a triumphant shower of drops, flickered a glance at his master, and trotted up to lay the stick at Sara's feet. She shrank from her uncle's expression and did not dare say a word to the dog. You! He was too angry to speak coherently. "Prying, interfering." "I wasn't prying, sir. I was just having a look." "And making my dog help you," he roared. "As for him, here, sit at once." Thugden slunk across obediently. Uncle Simon grasped his walking stick, and the dog cowered, flattening himself towards the ground. "I'll teach you to come when you're called," he said, through his gritted teeth. "I'll teach you whom you obey." The heavy stick rose and fell. Thugden howled. "Oh, no!" cried Sara. Don't beat him. It was my fault, not his." She stumbled forward, half blinded by tears. She heard another blow and another howl. Then she caught her uncle's arm. She saw his face, purple and disoriented with fury, and heard his wordless bellow. She saw the stick coming at her and tried to dodge, and was knocked to the ground by the weight of her uncle's body. The breath was crushed out of her. It was seconds before she could pull herself free. She scrambled up, bruised and shaken. Thugden hadn't moved, and her uncle, unmoving too, lay where he had fallen. "Sir," she said timidly, "are you all right? Sir?" And presently, "Uncle?" It was some time before she dared touch him. When she did, she knew he was dead. The nightmare had reached the ultimate point of horror. Polly woke up. Her relief lasted less than a second. Bewilderment replaced it. For a moment she thought she must still be sleeping. She wasn't in her room. She stood amid moonlit trees. A few yards away was the wall, and at her feet ran the stream. How could she really be out here in the middle of the night, shivering in pajamas and bare feet? The moon was bright enough to show her that she was just next to the dam they had destroyed, and as she recoiled, she knew with dread that this was no dream. Yet, after all, why be afraid? She knew the history of the pool now, who made it, and how it caused his death. It served him right. She was even gladder than before that they had destroyed it. The stream ran shallow where the bed of the pool had been. It held her eyes and stopped her running away. There was something there, under the water, a shape that was too regular to be right, like the corner of a trunk. Suddenly she knew why the pool had been made. It was a hiding place. Uncle Simon had buried something underneath it. Buried treasure? Money? She was just about to have a closer look when a nasty thought struck her. He had died just here, right where she was standing. Suppose Sara wasn't the only ghost. Suppose he still guarded his hoard. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. There was someone behind her. She tried to run, tripped, and fell headlong. A stone rushed to meet her. When Frederick woke to the sound of crying, his first thought was one of cool astonishment. So it was true after all. A moment later, he began to experience what he recognized as the physical symptoms of extreme fright. "This'll teach you to be skeptical," he thought, but not aloud, in case his voice should tremble. The crying continued, gathering courage from its faintness. He got out of bed and opened his door. Yes, it really did come from Polly's room. Polly! She was up there with whatever it was, and she had been so frightened, and they had made her sleep there again. "Come on," he thought sternly. "Polly went up when she heard it. You've got to do the same. Stop that shaking." He edged slowly along the landing, then took the stairs at a run, flinging open the door and switching the light on all in one movement. A small, solid figure stood by the bed, blinking and silenced. "Were you making all that noise?" demanded Frederick. "Yes," sniffed Hugh. "I can't find number 3, and now Polly's gone as well." The bed was empty. "I suppose she's in the bathroom, you idiot." Reaction made him angry. "She isn't, 'cause I went in there myself." Something made Frederick go over to the window and look out. He was stiffened. Surely that was a movement among the trees. What on earth was going on? "You, go back to bed," he said with forced kindness. "I think Polly's, gone for a little stroll. I'll bring her back." Hugh allowed himself to be persuaded. He couldn't have noticed that all Polly's clothes were still on in the chair. Frederick dressed rapidly, feeling anxious. He thought Polly might be sleepwalking, but he had never heard of a sleepwalker going so far. When he got outside, there was no sign of her anywhere. He wondered if it could have been something else he had seen. He went a little further, just to make sure, shining his torch around him, and then he found her. She was lying motionless by the broken dam, half in and half out of the stream, with her head next to a large boulder. He dragged her clear, and found a large bump on her temple. The skin was grazed and bleeding slightly. He spoke to her and splashed water on her face, which was one of the few parts that wasn't already wet. She didn't stir. Suddenly anxious, he felt for her pulse, but it was there all right. It was a good thing he had had first aid lessons, he thought, and could manage a fireman's lift. He got her in position and began to stagger down through the wood. He was exhausted when he reached the house and dumped Polly rather unceremoniously on the kitchen floor. After resting for a moment or two, he went to wake his parents. Alarmed and incredulous, they came downstairs. Uncle Clement took one look at Polly and went to the telephone to call a doctor. When he returned, she was opening her eyes. Her face was first confused and then frightened. "The money," she said. "How do you feel, dear? Does anything hurt?" asked her aunt. "My head," said Polly faintly, and closed her eyes again. "We must get these wet clothes off her and put her to bed," said her uncle. "No," said Polly. "Don't worry, dear. They'll go away," said her aunt. "No," repeated Polly. Frederick was fairly sure it wasn't modesty that bothered her. After having mistaken Hugh for a ghost, he could sympathize, albeit illogically, with her feelings on the subject. "It's the room," he said. "Put her in my bed. I don't mind." "She's surely not still thinking of that. Is it that, Polly?" "Yes." Her face relaxed. "Well, I suppose she can go in your bed. Is your room tidy for when the doctor comes?" I'm going to pick you up now, Polly," said Uncle Clement. "Can you put your arms around my neck?" "Yes, that's good." Polly frowned. "The money," she said. "What money, dear?" "In the pool." They exchanged glances and asked no further questions. When the doctor arrived, she was tucked up in Frederick's room, clean and dry. "She seems very confused," they told him before he went in. "Shock and slight concussion," he said afterwards. "I've given her something to make her sleep. I'll call again tomorrow." Polly slept soundly, with shelves of medicines next to her head. Okay. That was chapter 11. I'm going to keep going with chapter 12. Inside the trunk. Have you been into Polly yet? Asked Uncle Clement as he ate his breakfast next morning. "No, it's early. I suppose she's still sleeping." Aunt Sylvia yawned. "I wish I was. What a night." "It sounds callous to me, I guess, but it will be a great relief to me when that young lady goes home. Her fantasies will be her parents' responsibility then. I must say, if I were they, I'd think about taking her to a psychiatrist." "What was it the doctor said?" He thought the anxiety over this haunting nonsense had probably precipitated the sleepwalking. She might have made for the pool because she's been obsessed with that, too. But he'd never heard of anyone getting so far without hurting themselves before. It's a mercy Frederick saw her going and fetched her back so quickly. She might have lain there half the night. I wonder if she does it at home. John and Lucy must have warned us. With Lucy ill, I don't suppose they thought. Well, I must be off or I'll be late. After he had gone, Aunt Sylvia looked into Frederick's room. Polly stirred at once. "What's happened to me?" she asked hoarsely. She was flushed and bright-eyed. "Why am I in here? What's wrong with my head? It's got a big lump on it." "Don't try to sit up. How do you feel?" "Horrible. What's happened?" "You walked in your sleep last night. You went right out of the house and Frederick found you up by the wood. You'd fallen and banged your head." "In the wood?" Polly frowned and then shuddered. "I remember now. I woke up and I was by the pool. Frederick found me?" She bounced up in the bed, but subsided again immediately, clutching her head with an agonized expression. "Do lie still, dear, and try to keep covered up. You look as though you might have a chill, and no wonder out there in nothing but pajamas and soaked to the skin." "Did I fall into the pool?" She shuddered again. "How awful!" "Well, the pool isn't there any more, is it? But I gather you were where it used to be. Did Frederick say anything about a trunk?" she asked tensely. "A trunk?" repeated Aunt Sylvia in surprise. "No, he didn't. Can he come in and see me?" "He's not up yet. Can I see him as soon as he is?" "Now calm down. You'll make yourself feel worse. The doctor will be coming soon, and we'll have to see what he says about visitors." "Visitors!" said Polly frantically. "But I'm not ill. My head hurts when I move it, that's all." "You don't look at all well to me." Aunt Sylvia was right. Polly had a chill. The doctor pronounced her temperature to be 101, and said she must stay in bed. "She seems extremely anxious to see her cousin. She'll probably rest better if he's allowed to go in for a few minutes." "I haven't called him yet since he was up in the night." "Yes, well, there's no tremendous hurry." The doctor departed, and the rest of the household came down to breakfast. Aunt Sylvia explained Polly's absence to the younger ones. "She's been asking to see you, Frederick. You can go up when you've finished eating." "She never came and found number 3, said Hugh. "Why don't you listen? She was ill," snapped Frederick. "I had to go to sleep without him," continued Hugh heavily. "I found him this morning. He was under my bed." "Great," said Frederick sarcastically. He stood up. "I'll go and see Polly now." Her eyes were closed and she looked very hot. Just as he was retreating, she opened them and saw him. "Fluff, don't go away." I'm sorry, did I wake you? Doesn't matter, Fluff. Aunt Sylvia said you found me in the pool. Where the pool was, corrected Frederick. Polly paid no attention. You must have seen the chest. You did, didn't you? What chest? Asked Frederick carefully. Polly's eyes had a wild glitter that alarmed him. In the pool. The corner of it shows, Fluff. I've worked it all out. Uncle Simon buried his money right there. He made the pool, you see. I dreamed it last night. But he hadn't any money, said Frederick, reluctantly harmoniing her. He told that doctor so. That was just what he said because he knew he might die and didn't want Sara to get it. So he hid it, and then he did die. It was in my dream. Then I woke up by the pool and I saw the corner of the chest under the water. Oh, Fluff, you must have seen it too. Look, Polly. He rubbed his nose uncomfortably. You mustn't start getting all upset. Your temperature. She grabbed his wrist. I'm not upset. You must tell me. I shall be upset if you don't. Did you see it? No, I didn't, because there's nothing there, he said firmly. You were still asleep when you thought you saw it. It's quite natural. The blow on your head's confused you. If I were you, I'd stop thinking about your nightmare and try to get some sleep. He disengaged his hand and saw that tears were running down her cheeks. Are you feeling very bad? Shall I go get Mother? No, Fluff. Will you go and see? Please say you will. I know it's there. Oh, Polly. What was the use of talking to her when she was in this state? All right, I will. Here was an excuse to leave. It sounded as though the younger ones were in the boys' room. As he went past, his own name caught his ears. Won't give Frederick any of my candy, said Hugh. You mean little boy, said Jennifer. He never has any of his own, said Michael. He could if he wanted to, replied Hugh, unmoved. He couldn't. You know Polly said he doesn't get any spending money. Yes, but it isn't true. I saw Uncle giving him 3 50-cent pieces on Friday. $1.50? Jennifer sounded completely disillusioned. Maybe it was a present, said Michael doubtfully. It was spending money. He said so. Frederick found to his irritation that he was blushing. Really, whenever did Polly get her ideas? He didn't know whether to be touched or annoyed by her efforts on his behalf. He went on downstairs, and his mother called from the dining room. Frederick, is that you? He dodged to the kitchen and out of the back door, pretending not to have heard. He was sure she would be wanting him to amuse his cousins, and he felt more like avoiding them for the time being. He found himself walking up the hill. He supposed he might as well go and look for Polly's chest. After all, she had meant well about the candy. Of course, there was nothing there. He had known there wouldn't be. Polly had been mistaken, easy enough by moonlight. He picked up his stick and stirred the water into cloudy confusion. Who'd bury anything here, for heaven's sake? A stick struck something hard. A stone? He bent down and felt in the mud his fingers. It did feel remarkably like. He knelt and was able to use both hands. Now he could see it. Undoubtedly the corner of a box or a trunk. He was glad there was nobody to witness his expression as he digested the fact. He soon worked out what had happened. The removal of the dam, together with the previous day's heavy rain, had exposed the buried object. Then it must have gotten lightly covered again in the confusion of rescuing Polly from the water. Polly was right all the time, he said slowly. He jumped to his feet. Bare hands were no use here. He needed tools. Polly, dozing uneasily, had lost all sense of time. The bed had become a checkerboard, and she was the checkers, waging a ridiculous and interminable war on each across the squares. Michael rescued her, appearing beside the bed with an anxious face. Did I wake you? I'm glad you did. I was 24 checkers. Oh, are you very ill? No. Has Frederick been to look for the money? She asked suddenly. I don't know. What money? The money in the pool. Will you go and look, Michael? She heard her aunt's voice break in. So there you are. Come away now. Polly isn't well enough to talk to you. She wanted to protest, but found she had no energy. She's been saying such funny things, came Michael's fading voice. It's nothing. It's because she's feverish. The door closed. Frederick wasn't in with Polly, said Michael, rejoining the others in the drawing room. Aunt Sylvia's angry with him for vanishing, observed Jennifer, picking moodily at a scab on her knee. Oh, why doesn't Polly get better? I'm so bored and there's nothing to do. She's feverish, said Michael gravely. She said she was 24 checkers, and she's forgotten that we took the dam away. Why? Asked Hugh. Because she told me to go and look for some money in the pool. He wondered if he ought to tell Hugh to take his feet off the seat of the armchair. Hugh stared vacantly, then said, why has she forgotten? Because she's ill. Is there really some money there? Said Jennifer with interest. Oh no, I don't think so. Let's go and see. She went purposely to the door. But, oh well, all right, said Michael, following her. I don't forget things when I'm ill, said Hugh to the heir. Come on, number 3. We'd better go too. They passed Aunt Sylvia. Are you going in the garden? Try to keep out of mischief, won't you? I expect you'll find Frederick somewhere. They found him, and his shoes and socks off, standing in the stream and struggling with a large muddy oblong. Look, said Hugh in tones of deep pleasure. Mischief. Frederick's room was full of people. It was almost like a party, thought Polly as she sat up in bed and recounted her last dream to an audience so large it made her shy. Not only were her uncle and aunt there, but Mr. Mather and my fiancée, Margaret Jameson, as well. Polly's temperature was down to normal. She had slept soundly all afternoon, secure in the knowledge that the previous chest stood outside the back door. Aunt Sylvia refused to have it in the house until it had dried off, and wouldn't be touched until Uncle Clement got home. I think I could break the lock, Frederick had said, but Mother won't let me try. Anyway, you must be there when it's open, Polly. Then she had wakened, feeling much better, and had eaten soup and pudding while people popped in and out to see how she was doing and bringing her messages. Mr. Mather called. He's coming and bringing a lady. He wants to tell you something. Uncle Clement's home. We're just going to show him the chest. They're going to bring up the chest here. It was standing on sheets of newspaper in the corner a squat black metal trunk. Polly glanced at it continually to reassure herself that it was real. He was dead, she concluded at last. What did he die of? Asked Hugh. What happened to Sara then? Asked Michael. I don't know, said Polly. I woke up then. She had already admitted the source of the story to the younger ones. I think I can tell you the rest, interposed Mr. Mather. Can you? Exclaimed Polly. But how? Thanks to an inspiration of Margaret's. He smiled at her, and she blushed faintly. She asked me if there were any of Miss Piper's descendants still living in the parish. We had a look in the records and found a Miss Woodstock, whose maiden name was Piper. Old Miss Woodstock? Said Uncle Clement. She has the cottage with the fine garden, hadn't she? That's right. We called on her and found we were in luck. Her mother used to work for Simon Stampinstone. And Sara, does she remember Sara? Begged Polly. She remembers his niece coming to live with him, though at first she'd forgotten the name. She was only a child herself at the time, but she used to hear her mother talk about it, and his death made a big impression on her because it was so dramatic. A heart attack brought on by losing his temper with the dog, they said. It was very upsetting for Sara. Apparently she scarcely spoke a word for a whole day afterwards. Miss Piper came up here and stayed with her while they made arrangements, and after the funeral she went to live with her former schoolteacher. Miss Swirls, said Polly with satisfaction, and added, So that proves it, doesn't it? She was really real. Yes, Polly, said Uncle Clement heavily. We owe you an apology. Embarrassed, she muttered something inaudible and changed the subject quickly. Did he leave her any money? He left no will and no money. Everyone was rather surprised. He had a reputation for meanness, and they thought there'd be a good bit tucked away. But I believe that's what you think you found? He glanced at the child's eager faces, and Polly nodded vigorously. He certainly sounds like a likely miser, he mused. That might have been why he had Thugden to guard his hoard. Uncle Clement coughed. I think we're straying into the realms of fancy here. It seems to be a point we could check, said the minister mildly, eyeing the trunk. Yes, Dad, do open it now, urged Frederick. Well, perhaps this is the moment. He knelt down and delved into his tool bag, then moved back a little to give him room to work. We mustn't be too hopeful, he cautioned. It may very well be empty. Who would bury an empty trunk? Said Polly. I know it's the money. I know it is. If he didn't want his niece to have it, why couldn't he make a will leaving it to someone else? Asked Aunt Sylvia, whose tone of polite interest contrasted strongly with the suppressed excitement of Uncle Clement's. Perhaps because there wasn't anyone else, said Mr. Mather slowly. Sara was his only living relative, and he doesn't seem to have had any close friends. If he was a real miser, he'd have been a little mad on the subject, unable to bear the idea of anyone having his precious money, and of course Sara would have inherited it automatically if he died without leaving a will. Aha, said Uncle Clement to himself, beginning to get somewhere. He added more loudly, If by any chance it should be money, I shall certainly see that you children get a prize for finding it." Under cover of the younger one's delighted babble, Polly whispered to Mr. Mather, "But it isn't his." Margaret gave her a quick smile. "I feel rather like that, too," she murmured. "But it isn't, is it?" "You know, I think it is," whispered the minister. "It was found on his land, you see." "But it's Sarah's." Tears of indignation stood in her eyes. Luckily, the others were crowding round Uncle Clement, with their backs turned and paying no attention to spare her. "It was once," agreed Mr. Mather. "But don't you think Sarah is quite possibly dead by now?" "I know she is," said Polly, diverted, "or she couldn't haunt me." Margaret spoke into the minister's ear. "The letter." "I'd forgotten." He felt in his pocket. "Here, Polly. Miss Woodstock let us have it. I thought you'd like it. A letter from Sara to Miss Piper." "It's opening," cried several voices. "Let me see," exclaimed Polly, craning from the bed. Slowly the lid creaked, and the contents of the trunk were revealed. It was half filled by a mass of jumbled gray-brown fragments, rather like dead leaves, except that some still had corners, and on some ghostly figures still showed. There was an awful silence. Uncle Clement made the quickest recovery. "The fool buried bills," he said conversationally, as though he had guessed it all along. "And the damp gone in." He touched a fragment bearing the legend $20. It crumbled into pieces. Frederick was the next to find a voice. "What a waste," he groaned. "All that money." "Dust and ashes," said Mr. Mather softly. "To think it once killed a man. If he hadn't worn himself out making the pool, he probably wouldn't have had a fatal attack the next day." "I wonder how much there was," Jennifer pondered. "Oh, well," said Frederick, striving to be philosophical, "it rounds off the story, and you guessed it right." He gave Polly a small grin. "Yes, it's nice to know." She sniffed the faint, musty smell that hung in the air. "Dead money. What can we do with it?" "Throw the lot away," said Uncle Clement shortly. "It's worthless." He gathered up his tools and went out. "Dirty stuff," said Aunt Sylvia distastefully, closing the lid. "Now, it's bedtime for you younger ones, and Polly must get some sleep after all the excitement. Can we offer you some sherry before you go?" "That's very kind of you." Mr. Mather lingered for a moment while Aunt Sylvia shooed the others out. "Disappointed?" he murmured. "I don't know," said Polly slowly. "The money meant an awful lot to him," he said, "but the lack of it couldn't really hurt Sara. She escaped. That was all she cared about." "I wonder why her ghost is a child," mused Polly, who found she could talk about it quite easily now. "I think there never was an actual palpable, if that doesn't sound too much of a contradiction in terms, ghost. You were haunted by her unhappiness, you could say." "But I won't be any more," said Polly with certainty. "No. Well, good-bye, Polly. I hope I see you again before you go." "Good-bye, and thank you very much for the letter." When he had gone, she drew it out and looked at it. The ink had faded, but Sarah's slapping, curly hand was still clear. "Dear Miss Piper, I thought maybe you would like to know that gray one has settled down very well here. Thank you again very much for keeping him for me. I'm sorry I took him away again so soon, except I'm sure he was a nuisance to you, really. And thank you for looking after me so kindly until Miss Swirls could come for me. It is so lovely to be back in a place I know. Miss Swirls said she was worried about me all the time," she wrote again, after Uncle Simon made me send the horrid letter. "But as I never got it, I think he must have been watching the mail in case, and burnt it. I'm going to be a teacher at her school. I can't really believe it. It's so exactly what I would like to do. In 2 years' time I can begin with the little ones, and I'm going on learning until then. It's funny, but I'm so pleased to be doing lessons again. I thought she had told Uncle Simon I was stupid, but she only said that I was not brilliant, but a good steady worker. Everyone in the school likes Grey One. When I start teaching, he will be a help. Don't you think they will learn the cat sat on the mat much more quickly if they can see a real cat doing it in the classroom? Thank you again for everything. I am so happy. Yours affectionately, Sara. And that's the end of The Sound of Crying. So this was a really good book written in 1970. It turns out everything was real. There was a trunk in the pool. I keep forgetting what the headline is. There was a trunk in the pool, and he had buried all his money, but it was all bills. So going from the 19th century to the time of this book, all the money got damp and gross and just no good. So what happened though, she got the letter that Sara had written. There's a good closure on her dream. And I think for Sara too, it was a closure as well. Her unhappiness was solved. And she got to share that with someone who solved it for her, Polly. And all in all, that was a really interesting book to read. I quite enjoyed that one. It was 12 chapters long and 149 pages. All right. So, if you enjoyed this book, audiobook by Gnomes, stay tuned for another one. I will let you know what it is tomorrow because we're going to start a new one. So thank you for joining us, Sound of Crying. And I hope everyone has a super great, awesome day, night, afternoon, morning, whatever's going on in your world. All right, this is Gnome signing off. Have a good one.